Okay, in our last video we created this public function called doConvert, and this was created inside our class. So actually this is now referred to as a method for the class. So let's go on now, and oh, by the way, here's what it looks like in the class. Alright, so let's go on to creating an object from a class. Okay, so we want to be able to use our class and use our method in the class. Now this is the same idea as when you drag a button onto your form, you're creating when you drag a button onto your form and then you run the application, then you have an object of type button. Now we want to get an object of type of type convert postcode. That's the class. We want to get an object of that type and then use the method that we just created called doConvert. So he says double click on the button on your form and add the following code. Now remember, we already have the class, right? We've already written the code for the class, so we already have the class. Okay, now we're going into our form though, and we're going to double click on the button. Okay, the class is separate from our form. Okay, now inside the button we're going to do this. First we're going to just create a variable, string variable. It's called new code. And actually at the end that new code is going to be fed into our text box. Okay, but anyway, it's just a string variable at this point. And now we're going to create object convert postcode. This is just the name of a variable. We can call it anything we want, but the type of variable it is here. What type is it? It's of the type of the class that we just wrote the code for. Okay, so that's totally new. We haven't done anything like this before. It looks similar to saying like this is of type integer or this is of type string, and it is similar, but the thing is it's a type this, which is the class that we're creating. Okay, now this is just like a declaration. It's not, we haven't assigned it a value yet. In order to assign it a value, we have to do this. So this is basically just they call it a pointer to the location of the class, basically it says. Okay, but now to actually assign it something. So at this point this is just empty space. But when we do the next line, this becomes an actual space is actually created and reserved for, I think actually space is created here, but it's or I should say it's actually created and reserved here, but we actually fill it in here. Okay, so we fill it in with with all the stuff that makes up a convert postcode, our class, which isn't much stuff actually. We don't have much in there at all, but anyway, if it was more complicated it would fill it up with everything. Okay, so we need this new keyword to do this. Okay, now we haven't had to use this before, I don't think, and certainly we don't need to use it when we're assigning a value to an integer or a value to a string, but we do need it when we're creating a new object, and that's what this is doing. Okay, so now this is an object. Okay, that's the point. So if it's an object, we can use the dot notation on it to get at its method, and that's exactly what we do in the next line. Here's the object, and we're using its method that we just added to its definition to the class code. It was called doConvert, and now we're using it as dot the method. Okay, and then of course the method accepts some kind of text, and this is some kind of text, so, or some kind of string I should say, and this is some kind of string, so it's accepting that. And so so this method, we know what it does. It converts from lowercase to uppercase, so that's what's happening here. And all of that then is being fed into here. So really we just wanted to access that method, but we wanted to call that method basically. But now that it's in the class, we first have to create an object of that type class and then call the method using the dot notation. Okay? Okay, so that's it. Then everything else is, the rest is simple. This now has the uppercase code, and then we just take that uppercase code and feed it into here. Okay, so that's the big deal. That's our big accomplishment. That's all the magic. That's object-oriented programming. Well, the magic is also designing your objects so that they're sort of useful, and that they make your coding better. That's a whole nother subject. That's like an art, the art of designing, good objects, ones that are useful to you. But that's not really what we can learn here. But we learn all the technicalities of it here. So let's quickly read what he says. The first line just sets up a new string variable called new code up here. Just a new string variable. Whatever is returned from our function will be stored there, right? That's what we did here. The next line is where the action starts. Okay, so this is when we start to create our object, but this is just not quite creating it. In this line, it's actually being created here. Okay, the next line is where the action starts, here. The variable name is just something. This variable name is just something we made up ourselves. The obj means, prefix means it's an object. So that's kind of the, what's it called? Hungarian, what's it called? Partial Hungarian? I forget what it's called. Hungarian notation. And this is for our benefit, right? We put this in front of there to remind us that the type of data that it holds is an object rather than an integer or a string. After you type this as, you of course get a list of all kinds of stuff that it could be. It could be a string, it could be a whatever. So after you type as and hit the space bar, you'll see the pop-up box appear. If you type in the letters C-O-N-V though, it'll scroll down to this one, and you'll see the list automatically move down. The class you created should be on that list as the next image. So it should be here. Okay? You can double-click the name of your class. Of course, you just select it. Okay. But what you're doing in this step is setting up a pointer to your class. You're telling VB where the class can be found, basically, and then storing this inside the variable called here. So it's like, I guess what's stored in here at this point is like the location of the class that you want this to be to come from. So it says if VB didn't know where your class is, it can't create an object from it. The next line of code, that's the one with new in it, is the one that creates a new object from your class. So this is what we said. You type the name of your variable, which you just defined earlier, then an equal sign. To the right of the equal sign comes the word new. This is what tells VB to create a new object. And the class it's creating the new object from is the one called postcode, which is the one we just wrote. Now he says you could actually type this all in one line like this. So this part was the first line before, right? And then the second line was this. And you could put this all in one line like this, but he advises us not to do that because when you do this, you're using space. I think I might have said when you're doing this, you're creating space, but that's not right. Okay, you're not creating space, you're creating a pointer just to the location. But when you do this, you're creating the space. And he says you may not want to, especially if this is a big class. Our class is tiny, but if this is a big class, then you may not want to do this because it takes up a lot of space in the memory. Anyway, he says if you do it this way, this does two jobs. It sets a pointer to the class where the class is and creates a new object from the class. Okay, but there are reasons why you don't want to do it this way. One is that the objects take up space in memory, and you really only need to create them when they are needed. For example, what if the text box was blank? So if the text box was blank, then there's no reason to create this object so that you could make whatever was in there capital letters, because there's nothing in there. So he said you might want to, instead of doing this all in one line, you might want to do this in one line, and then don't do this until you've checked first to see whether the text box is empty or not. Okay, so he says you might want to do this. If text box is empty, then don't create that object, just give them a message box. But if it isn't empty, then you can create the object. So that's reasonable. Here's the, so okay. Okay, then he explains this, which is just, well, this is important. This is where we have our object now, and we call its method. And then we, inside the method can convert text, so we want to give it some text, and we're giving it some text here. Okay, he says as soon as you type, he calls this a full stop, right? As soon as you type a period or a full stop, then you'll see a list of the methods associated with this type of object, and there's really only one that we created, but there's some, whenever you have objects, they have some they have a set of methods that they all get automatically. So these are extra methods that are already there. As soon as you create an object, you get these for free, so to speak. You don't have to write them, but this one we wrote. So there's a few here: equals, get hash code, get type, reference equals to string. But this is the one that we created, and this is also there in the list. So as soon as you type a full stop after your object variable, you see a pop-up box with the name of your new method in the list. And also in here, this is a kind of tool tip, they call it, about your new method. And it tells you that it has a it tells you this is actually the first line of your new method, right? Of the method that you created. This was the first line of it. So we wrote public function do convert postcode as string. So we learned from that it's a function. It takes as an input a string, and it outputs the result as a string. So he says the image above shows you that the name of your method do convert has been recognized by VB. You can tell it's a method because of the purple block next to it. So here, these are methods, and we know that because they have these purple blocks. And also you can notice the tooltip, it's the first line of your function. In between the round brackets, VB is telling you what type of data needs to be passed over to the method. It's a string here. String, and right here, string here, whoops, thing there. And the second as string tells the method that tells you that the method returns a value that needs to be stored somewhere. So this returns a value, a string value, which needs to be stored somewhere. And then we do, of course, store it somewhere. We store it here in new code. So if you set up a method that returns a value, which means a function, you need to store it in a variable. To get at the method inside of your class, first type the name of your object variable, which is what we did here. Here is the name of our object variable. Then type a full stop, means a period. Look for the name of your method in the pop-up list that appears. The final line of code takes what we put in here and assigns it to our text box, so that now we get capital letters in our text box, so it converts this to this. Okay, so now we've actually accessed our method through our class by creating an object or an instance of that class, and then using the dot notation to access the method. Okay, very good. Now, next one is we're going to creating and using methods that don't return a value. So this one did, so this is not so exciting, but in fact, I guess we should do it here because it's short. So we can also, your methods do not have to return a value. So inside our class again, we can add some extra code. We have basically only one piece of code there. We have the definition of the function, but now we can have a definition of a subroutine. Or sub-procedure. Is it called sub-procedure? Anyway, now we can do this, and this is just a very simple, but notice it says public. So this is a public subroutine. Doesn't do anything so interesting, but what's the name of it? It's called this, and it doesn't take any variables, right? Doesn't take any input. Now, like the function that we just created before did take input. This doesn't. Remember, the function we created before took input. Where is it? Here. No, this is when we used the function, or this is when we created the class. Remember, let's review that idea once more. By the way, we first created the class, then all of this was done inside our form. Now remember, the form and the class are separate code. They're not inside each other. We can use the class because we added it to our form, but it's separate code. Okay, so this was inside our form, this stuff here, but the class was completely separate code. So the class was here. This was a separate piece of code, completely separate. And as I said, the only thing we have in our class is this. But and remember, I was just making the point that this function takes a parameter, but then the sub-procedure that we're going to create right now doesn't take anything. It's just a very boring sub-procedure. But anyway, but once again, this class is completely separate. What we do after we write the code for this class is we create an instance of it on our form. Okay? We create an instance of this class on our form. This is separate from our form, but we can create instances of it in our form, and that's what we did in the button code of our form. Okay, going back to this sub-procedure. Here it is. Let's see. Here it is. So it's very boring. Just has a name. It's of type sub-procedure, not of type function. It's public, and all it does is this: conversion complete and sub. So again, though, this is inside our class. So actually we created, so here he adds it to our class. Here's the class, ends down here. Before we only had this in our class. Now we've also added this. But let me make something clear. Okay, suppose we change it to this, and then we go back to our form and we run it. we don't have to change anything in our form for this new. No, that's not true. It won't do anything. This is another function, so we can access this function as well inside our form. Okay, so this is the code we have now for our class. Now we go back to our form. We just have we just created the object. We did this before, just to do convert. But now, on a new line after here, we can also add this line. So what does this mean? It means that we can take our same object and access a different method of it. This is the do message box method. This one that's very boring, right here. So we can access that now as well. So he says, why not do it? So put it here, and so. And of course you can do the same thing here. You're going to see the tooltip and so on. You're going to see it in. So now we see do convert, and we also see do message box, the two methods that we've written for this class, so we can see both of them. And here's the tooltip for that. It says it's a sub procedure, not a function. Anyway, we access it here, and so try it out and see what happens. You should convert the text box from small letters to capital letters, and then because you also put this in your button code, you're going to get a message box at the end. Okay? Alright, so that's the next big step. So we've added another function, another method, but much more importantly, we've accessed the methods from the object. Okay, so let's stop here, and the next thing is you can create properties for objects, just like a button has methods associated with it. Actually, we haven't used many methods associated with buttons, but I think we might have used some. But they do have methods associated with them, but they also have properties, and we've used mostly their properties, like their text property or their name property or whatever. They have their, I don't know, font size property or whatever, but we've used a lot of their properties. I don't think we've used too many methods for buttons, but anyway, for any object we can create methods, as we've just shown, but we can also create properties. So that's what we'll do next.